My name is Earl Pruitt, and in the summer of 1963 I was working the overnight shift for Cimarron County. Badge, flashlight, a county-issue Ford pickup that smelled like old coffee and dog hair. Night watchman. Mostly I drove the panhandle roads from around 10 at night until 6 in the morning, checking grain elevators, farm gates, the odd stretch of highway where kids like to park. It was about as quiet a job as you could find in Oklahoma, which is exactly why I took it after my knee went bad. Now, the Harker place on County Road 18 had sat empty for the better part of 2 years. Gray clapboard house, a dirt drive flanked by dead elms, a detached garage that leaned like it was tired. I'd passed it maybe 300 times on my route and never thought much about it. Then, first week of July, a light came on inside. Somebody had moved in. I swung the truck slow past the property and saw a Dodge station wagon in the drive, boxes stacked on the porch. Normal enough. I made a note in my log, new occupant, Harker property, and kept going. That was a Tuesday. Thursday night, maybe 2:30 in the morning, I came around the bend on 18, and my headlights swept the front yard of that house. The grass was cut, not trimmed, not mowed over, I mean sculpted. Every blade the same height, the edges clean as a barber's cut right up against the road. Smelled like fresh-cut lawn, that green, almost sweet smell that hits you in the back of the throat. I slowed down and looked. Nobody out there. Porch, light off. The Dodge was still in the drive. I checked my watch. 2:34 a.m. I told myself some folks just work late. Maybe the new tenant was one of those. A mow-it-at-midnight type. I wrote it in the log because I wrote everything in the log, and I moved on. Friday, I ran into Walt Briggs at the diner in Boise City. Walt was the county coroner, and also the only dentist within 40 miles, which tells you something about how Cimarron County operated. He mentioned the new tenant on 18 in passing, said the man's name was David Corley, 42, moved from Tulsa after a divorce. Walt knew because Corley had come into the diner the previous Sunday and introduced himself around. Quiet fellow, Walt said. Kept to himself. I didn't think about David Corley again until the following Wednesday, around 1 a.m., when I passed the Harker place and the yard was cut again. Same thing. Perfect. That green smell hanging low in the humid air. Porch, dark. Truck in the drive. Except this time, when my headlights passed over the yard, I noticed something sitting at the edge of the drive near the road. A lawnmower, old push reel type, the kind with the spinning cylinder blades, just sitting there facing the road like it had been left mid-job. I stopped the truck, stepped out, and walked up to it. The blades were damp. Not wet, damp, the way metal gets right after it's been used. The handle was still warm from a hand. I stood there in the dark for a moment. Cicadas going. Wind pushing through the dead elms with that dry, rattling sound. I shone my flashlight at the house. All dark. I called out, "County watchman, anybody home?" and got nothing back. I walked to the door and knocked hard 3 times. Nothing. I wrote it in the log. Lawnmower left at road edge, 1:17 a.m. No lights, no response to knock. We'll check tomorrow. I didn't get to check because Walt Briggs called me at 7 that morning. David Corley was dead. A farmhand named Tuck Rawls had come up the drive at first light to introduce himself, neighborly style, and found Corley on the kitchen floor. Walt ruled it a coronary. The man had a history, apparently. Said Corley probably went in his sleep or close to it, sometime late the previous night. The autopsy report came through Walt's office 3 days later, and he let me look it over because he knew I was curious, and Cimarron County was small enough that paperwork had a way of getting shared over coffee. Time of death, Walt estimated, was between midnight and 2 in the morning. Stomach contents: crackers, canned peaches, 1 beer. Hands. Walt made a note of this, almost as an aside. Hands showed fresh blistering on both palms, consistent with prolonged grip on a rough handle, like a tool handle. Both palms. I sat with that for a long time. Midnight to 2. Both palms blistered. The mower handle still warm at 117. I went back the next Thursday night. I don't know why. Professional habit, I told myself. Checking a property that was now empty again, and therefore back on my watch list. I drove slow down 18, came around the bend, and put my headlights on the yard. The grass was cut. I felt the hair come up on the back of my neck. The Dodge was gone. Walt told me Corley's brother had come and taken it. The house was empty. No electricity. No water, as far as anyone knew. But the grass was cut. Same even height. Same clean edges. And the mower was at the road again. I did not get out of the truck. I want to be straight about that. I'm not a man who spooks easy. But I sat in that truck with the engine running and the doors locked. And I looked at that mower in my headlights for a solid minute. The blades were catching the light, and they were wet. Same dampness. Summer night, dry as chalk. No rain, no dew yet. It wasn't even 3 in the morning. I wrote it in the log. I told Walt. Walt said I was tired. I went back again the Thursday after that. Told myself I'd just slow down and look. I didn't even want to stop. The grass was cut. The mower was at the road. Except this time, the mower wasn't facing the road. It was facing the truck. Facing me. Turned maybe 90 degrees from where it had been. Handle aimed at my windshield like somebody had just set it down in a hurry. Or like somebody had stopped mid-push and walked away and left it pointing at whoever was coming up the road. And there was something on the handle. I got out. I don't know why I got out. I think I needed to see it up close because if I drove away, I was never going to stop thinking about it. I walked to the mower and I shone my light on the handle. There were handprints on the grip. Not dirt. Something darker. Something that had dried to a brownish crust. Both grips, both hands. The way the blisters on Corley's palms would have pressed and wrapped and bled a little if he'd held on long enough. I took a step back and put the light on the house and the yard and the driveway, and I listened. Nothing. Just the cicadas and the elms and the flat, empty dark of the Oklahoma panhandle stretching out in every direction for 50 miles. But the grass was cut to the same height it had been, the night a dead man's hands were still warm from the handle. I filed a report. Sheriff Denton read it, told me to get some sleep. The property sat empty through the rest of that summer. I kept passing it on my route. The grass kept getting cut, every 6 or 7 days, like a schedule, like a maintenance routine. The mower always at the road, facing different directions each time. In October, the county sold the property at auction. A family from Liberal, Kansas bought it. I drove past the day they were unloading the moving truck. The kids were running in the yard. The wife was carrying boxes. The husband was standing in the drive looking at the grass and nodding to himself, the way a man does when he's pleased with what he's getting. The grass was cut. Fresh. That green smell in the cold October air. I pulled over and sat there with my window down and I almost got out. Almost walked up and said something. I didn't. I don't know what I would have said. I don't know that it would have helped. I put the truck in gear and finished my route. The family from Liberal, Kansas moved out 11 days later, and nobody I talked to ever found out exactly why. The Sears catalog on Earl Dunphy's front porch was the third one that week. That was the first thing I noticed. 3 catalogs in 6 days, all addressed to a man I was pretty sure had stopped answering his door sometime around Tuesday. My name is Roy Kavanaugh. In 1953, I was 31 years old, 3 years into my route along the eastern edge of Calhoun County, Nebraska. Corn country. Flat land that goes forever in every direction. The kind of horizon that makes you feel like God pressed his thumb down on everything and just held it there. I drove a '49 Ford panel truck, tan, with a crack in the passenger side window that let in a thin whistle of wind whenever I got above 40. I knew every mailbox on my route by the sound the flag made when I pulled it up. Earl Dunphy ran a furniture store out of a converted grain warehouse on Route 15, about 6 miles east of Schuyler. Dunphy's Home Furnishings, the sign read, hand-painted red letters on white board. He sold davenports and kitchen sets and bedroom suites, the kind of solid mid-century stuff that people out here bought once and passed down to their kids. He lived in the back of the building, had a whole apartment back there behind the showroom floor. I'd seen the light on back there plenty of mornings, a warm yellow square in that tin-sided building, and I always figured Earl was a man who liked his own company. The catalogs were addressed to him in a handwriting I didn't recognize, not the printed label the mail-order houses used. Someone had written his name and address in pencil, block letters, careful and even. No return address on any of them. The catalogs themselves were legitimate, genuine Sears, Roebuck fall-winter editions. But the addressing was strange enough that I held the third one a little longer than I should have before I dropped it in the box. That was a Wednesday. By Friday, the box was full. All 3 catalogs were still in there, plus the regular mail I delivered on Thursday. Earl hadn't touched any of it. Now, people miss their mail all the time. That's not unusual. But the light was still on in the back apartment. I could see it from the road, that same yellow square. And there was a smell. I want to be careful how I say this because I've heard people describe smells in dramatic ways, and I don't want to do that. It wasn't overwhelming. You had to be within maybe 15 feet of the building to catch it. But it was there, something sweet and heavy underneath the normal smell of dust and dried corn husks. Something that had no business being outside on a cool October morning. I didn't go to the door. I want to be honest about that. I told myself it was probably a dead animal under the building. A dog, maybe, or a raccoon that had crawled in through one of the foundation gaps. I left the mail and I drove on. I told my wife, Doris, about it that evening. She said I should call the county sheriff. I said I probably would, and then I didn't, because it felt like an overreaction. A smell. A full mailbox. Those aren't crimes. The following Monday, I pulled up to Dunphy's at my usual time, around 9:15 in the morning, and the front door of the showroom was open. Not wide open, maybe 4 inches, enough to see the darkness inside. I sat in the truck for a full 2 minutes. I know it was 2 minutes because I watched the clock on the dash. The door didn't move. Nothing moved inside that I could see. The corn in the field across the highway had gone dry and tan for the season, and it was moving in the wind, that dry, papery rustling that gets into your skull when the land is quiet enough. Finally, I got out of the truck. I pushed the door open with my mail bag, didn't touch it with my hands, which I think says something about what I was feeling, even if I wasn't ready to name it. The showroom was dim, the way those buildings always are, with light coming in gray from the high windows. There were davenports arranged in neat groupings, kitchen tables set with fake place settings, bedroom furniture in the back corner with the mattresses still wrapped in their factory paper. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly where it should be, except for the smell, which was considerably worse inside, and the dining room set in the center of the floor. It was a 6-piece set. Table, 4 chairs, a hutch along the wall, and it had been positioned carefully, deliberately, the way you'd arrange a room for a photograph. A Sears catalog was open on the table, open to the furniture section, and on the page, someone had circled one of the items in pencil, the same careful block letter hand. It was a casket. One of the mail-order caskets that Sears carried in those years. Plain pine. Circled twice, the pencil pressed hard enough to groove the paper. I backed out of that building. I drove to the payphone outside the Feed and Seed in Schuyler, and I called the county sheriff's office, and I told them everything I've just told you. The dispatcher didn't say much, just took the address and told me to wait by the building. I drove back and I parked across the highway and I waited. I did not go back inside. Sheriff's deputies found Earl Dunphy in the back apartment. I won't go into what they found, exactly, because some of what I heard secondhand may not be accurate, and also because I don't think it serves any purpose. What I will tell you is that Earl had been dead for approximately 9 or 10 days, which tracks with Tuesday of the prior week. And I will tell you that the county coroner ruled it a homicide, that Earl Dunphy did not die of natural causes, and that the investigation ran for 4 months without an arrest. What I have not told you yet, what I held back because I wanted you to understand the full shape of what came before, is what I saw when I was backing out of the showroom. I told you I backed out. What I didn't say was why I stopped in the doorway for a moment before I turned and ran. There was a man sitting in one of the davenports in the back corner of the showroom. I hadn't seen him when I came in. He was sitting with the stillness of someone who had been sitting there for a very long time. Not the stillness of sleep, but the practiced stillness of someone who has learned to wait. He was wearing a plain dark coat and a hat with the brim low, and his hands were folded in his lap, and he was looking at me. Not at the catalog, not at the furniture. At me. He had the kind of face that you cannot quite reconstruct afterward. I have tried, many times, to draw it in my memory, and every time the features slide away before I can fix them. I remember the general shape of a man. I remember the hands, large, pale, folded very neatly. I remember that he did not stand up. He just watched me back out of that doorway with an expression that I can only describe as patient. I told the deputies about him. They cleared the building and found no one. They said I had probably seen a coat on a display mannequin, that Dunphy used mannequins sometimes to model room settings. I said that might be right. I said it probably was. But here's the thing about a mannequin. A mannequin doesn't shift its weight when you make a sound. And when I'd knocked my mailbag against the doorframe on my way out, whatever was sitting in that davenport had moved, just slightly. Just enough. The case went cold in the spring of 1954. Earl Dunphy's sister came out from Lincoln to settle the estate. She sold the building to a farm supply company, which tore down the sign and poured concrete over the showroom floor. I finished out my career with the Postal Service, another 19 years on that same route. I drove past that building 5 days a week for all of it. Every morning at 9:15, I slowed down at the place where the mailbox used to be, and every morning I watched the window of that farm supply building as I passed. I told this story once, years ago, to a man I met at a Veterans Hall in Columbus. He listened carefully, and when I finished, he said he'd heard something similar. A story that moved around, he said, passing from person to person, and that whatever was in the story had a way of staying close to whoever was telling it. I've thought about that a lot. I'm telling it to you now. I hope you'll understand what I mean when I say I haven't been sleeping well lately. And last night, for the first time in 20 years, the light was on in a window it had no business being in. I didn't go check. I'm not going to. But I left the door unlocked, and I can't for the life of me remember deciding to do that.